welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a budgie. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here's the budgie. They're pretty cute birds. So there's domestic budgies that tend to be a different color than the ones you'll see in the wild, although the domestic ones can also be the same color. So I'm going to be doing the one that, the yellow, the more standard color, the yellow instead of the blue. So you build up feathers much like you build up fur, right? Where you're going to take it and, you're going to have a line coming off in the direction of the feathers and then lines in between, right? Just building it up. So, you have this sort of swoop coming up. So we're going to have feathers going off this way. Feathers going off this way. Feathers coming up this way. They all kind of need to make sense with each other. But always one feather in between the others. So as you come to the edge. And it's okay if one or two lines are a little out of place. Right, and then we'll loop this down. Up. So this is just a sketching step. It's to help sort out the direction the feathers would be going before I put full pin pressure. It's also okay right on the edge, with the feathers going up the way they are. It's all right that it won't line up perfectly. Pretty standard. Makes it easier. You don't have to worry about a perfect edge. Anytime you have fur or feathers, you're going to have a little bit of that. With longer hair, it's a little easier. Feathers certainly, they're not as long, but you still don't have to have a perfect edge on the edge of the face. And just, build it up. One feather, one line in between the others. And then as we bring it down, right by the eye, we're going to start looping this in a different direction. Because while it's swooping up and back, at this point it's swooping down the side of the face. Oh, that was a little crazy. And then we have these darker lines kind of intermixed, where you have these, dark stripes. So we're going to need to make sure that that shows up. Because they're only stripes, it has the potential to get lost. So I'll need to make sure that it doesn't get lost in the finished drawing. It's got some white by the eyes. So we have some white to fill in there. And then we'll bring it down this way. Right now we're kind of looping it back in because you have feathers coming down. Being mindful of the contour of the face and things, and to avoid line conflicts. Right, so we bring this down, the feathers kind of loop back this way, so as we come this way, they'll need to turn inward. I need to make sure there's no line conflicts when I do that. When I talk about line conflicts, what I mean is if I'm drawing this way and then I have something I'm drawing around, I don't want to end up in a situation where I've done that, because then the way you shadow and highlight it doesn't quite make sense, right? It doesn't quite work. And so it's a way to make sure that it looks as natural as possible. I don't anticipate that on this drawing I'm going to have any problems, but you can run into it sometimes. Unexpectedly, which is one of the reasons I do this step. Sometimes I do something or think something makes sense, and then I realize that what I'm actually doing is creating a problem, a little bit of a conflict. Right, so you have some feathers kind of coming down this direction. Being mindful of these black lines here. Still making sure to not draw over them. So shadows and highlights will do some of this. because right now it's, not exactly a good, it interrupts the flow of the line, right? Like you can kind of see how it's not making it a smooth transition, but shadows and highlights will fix that. I just need to make sure the lines make sense with each other. Now there's a transition coming up right down in here where yellow turns into green. So this is yellow, but this is green. And again, you have more of these black sections, but here it's a little thicker. And then you have, all this space. You're going to have some sort of twisting down because you have the tips of the feathers coming down this way. And as this comes further down, you can kind of see how that re-angles itself. So that will also help avoid any conflicts. And then they have kind of these black sections. Typically, as you go down the body of a bird, right, you have these feathers here that'll be longer. So it's okay to lengthen out your stroke. I typically try to keep my stroke length the length of the feather themselves. Faces for both birds, mammals, right, like fur, feathers, faces tend to have the shortest feathers. And then it gets longer as it comes down. Same is true on like long-haired animals. You'll see that as well. Not always, but usually, the hair by the face will be really short. And the hair or fur or feathers as it comes down will be longer. In the case of the budgie, though, too, because we're doing sort of this portrait, I started a little longer, but I'm lengthening it out even more as I come down here. But same thing, right? Over here it would be twisting in before it resumes going down. So it should have that same kind of pattern to it. Now, luckily with the black here, all of the black is contained within the bird, which is great because I don't like drawing black, so we won't have to on this one. We'll let the black stand as it is. So you have that kind of this like a dark blue, sometimes it looks a little purplish, where these feathers here come in before they go into black. Okay. And then the beak on the nose has like this little bit of like a lighter blue. This is a case where there could be line conflicts, right? So if I continue looping this and then have to come up this way, there's going to be an awkward conflict. And so to avoid that, what I'm going to do is have sort of a straight line coming down here and then looping it on either side of that. That can help avoid that, where I sort of reconcile it, and now there won't be any issue. Because of the angle, we're just going to leave that as the center point and allow, oh, not that much, allow the rest of that to loop. beak is kind of a off-color yellow. So we're going to come straight down, just like we did with the nose, and we're going to have, this is our center point, and then we're going to have the lines jutting off in other directions. Again, that avoids line conflicts. You could probably do it in another way, but I've never found another good way to really avoid it. And this works just as well. Okay. So then the green. And then we'll do the little bit of white. Green is down in here. Alright, same thing. One color in between the others. One line in between the others, one color in between the others. Okay. Now, when I say white, I always mean an off-white. So you have just this little bit of like by the eyes. Around the eyes, I'm typically more careful because eyes are the first things that we look at. And you have a little bit down underneath the bulge in the beak. All right. So there's the sketch. Now, light source I'm going to have coming from above and to the right, coming from up here. That makes sense because he's kind of turned that way, right? So it's coming right on him. It's always above and in front of, right? So it's not behind him and it's not next to him. So that would cast a different shadow. Above and in front of is going to give me the best chance to really highlight my subject. What that means is back on this side, right, there's going to be some shadowing on this side of the bird, and it'll fade over. But on the side of the light source, we'll start with full pin pressure, right, so that you can really see the difference when I'm really pressing down. So when I'm sketching, I'm not really putting full pin pressure, but I'm not really holding back either. I'm just kind of comfortably drawing. When I'm adding highlights, I put full pin pressure, and when I'm adding shadows, which is just like over here, it would be shadowed, I'm letting off my pin pressure. So I'm not putting a lot of pressure onto this. Not holding back as carefreely as I was when I was sketching it. So this is me actively like being mindful about how much pressure my pen has on the drawing tablet. But you can see that difference. Just lowering my pin pressure really lightens it up, or darkens it up in this case. Lightens up the stroke. And this really fills it in so that it can stand out on the black. So yeah, just full pin pressure, and we're following the lines we already did. So for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. Just being mindful of where shadows would kick in. There'd probably be a little bit under the eye, and you have the black lines that are coming up from there. Right, because you have the light source coming from above, so there likely would be a little bit right by the eye, and I need to be careful about where my black lines are so that they remain in place without looking like an intentional gap, or like an unintentional gap. Some of that was going to be full pin pressure, but right, and then we fade it all in. Usually I take the sketch layer off at this point. I've opted to keep it on for the moment because of all of the little black spots. I want to make sure. Those are going to be the trickiest part of this composition, I believe, is making sure those are maintained and look right. So if I pop that off. Yeah, if I pop it off, right, you can clearly see these, and then I can make some adjustments to fill them in without the sketch layer there. So I think that should work nicely. And then, right, light source coming from above and to the right, which means as we come to this side, instead of going into shadow like we were up top, we're going to have some highlight kick in. And then I highly recommend chronically saving your work. Typically when I'm doing shadows, which is what I'm doing over here, right, that light pin pressure, I'm going to give myself enough room to sort of fade it in. Otherwise you end up with a drawing transition. So I typically will pull the shadows over further than I need to, because that'll give me a little bit more control when I'm adding in the highlights. And all edges are in shadow, so even this edge on the side of the highlight will be in shadow, right, because the body is rounding away. So it's just, it won't have as deep of a shadow as this backside. Right, so all this up here, and it's just a matter of like tying it in. And again, just following those lines I've already drawn. Just sort of filling in the gaps basically with the shadows and stuff. And then right all the way down, it's going to have shadows on this side, but still dodging those areas that are going to be black. And with the feathers, I could add some shadowing underneath as they overlap each other here, but I don't know. With the black in place, I don't know that I'll need to. So I'm probably not going to. But I will fade it out underneath, right under here. And then this whole side is going to be in shadow, and down in here where you have feathers that are kind of on top of other feathers distinctly pushing them behind, all of this would be in shadow. Because you might have some of the tips of this catching highlight, but most of it's going to be in shadow. And certainly the feathers that are down here that are just really completely covered up. But I'm going to do this whole backside shadow first. And then just like up there, that'll let me decide where the highlights might be if, you know, there will be, just a matter of deciding where they are, so it'll just give me a little bit more control to decide where those would be. And then being careful by the beak, since that's a, you know, a sort of a hard object that's in front of the feathers on this side. I have a few spots where it looks like I've gone over, but I can probably fix that. On this side, they'll come up and over it, and that's fine. It's just on this back side here, where the beak is covering, presumably. Feathers should be behind. And I'm still kind of drawing as if these are individual feathers, even though there won't be any real indication. You know, I'll still be drawing it all together, but by stopping the edge of the line at the edge of a feather, it'll potentially give us a small visual cue that there's a different feather there. That's one way to do it. Is we pick up on those little differences. Instead of letting those edges blend, I'm keeping them separate. And then around this black spot on the wing, and the feather, the wing, whatever it is, not the wing. And then, you know, when I pop that off, that's kind of how that's looking so far. It's not bad. You really get the sense that there's feathers over here, and I'll just need to fix up by the beak. And then probably some shadowing because these face away from the light source, but there might also be, because they're above the feathers underneath, it might also be in highlight, but for now I'll do it in shadow, and then I can sort that out later. In addition to needing to come down and sort of fade it out, although you can have a harsher transition down, but it's fine. This will ensure if I need to change it, I can. It's harder to fix if I've over highlighted than it is if I've under highlighted, because if I've under highlighted, it's a matter of adding more lines. If I've over highlighted, that's trickier because then I have to take the lasso tool here and select it and take it out. And here it doesn't matter, right? Other side it did, this side it doesn't because you have the beak. The feathers are in front of the beak. Other side, not so much. Other side we'll have to fix up a little bit. All right, now, full pin pressure, but fading it in to what's already here. So letting it off as I get close to where the edges would meet. And it's okay to have some stray lines that go up that are too bright, but overall needs to not have that happen. You also don't want like a distinct ridge, right? Like you don't want to look at it and be like, well, this is highlight and this is shadow. You want there to be nice, gentle, tapered in look. And I'm changing spots a lot because it's kind of in a, some of this is on an awkward side for me. And so I keep trying to draw in sections that are making me twist a little bit, so then I inevitably go somewhere where it's easier to draw. This loop in particular is a little awkward for my positioning. All right, so now this is what I mean when I say that it can be too harsh, right? Like this is a clear like delineation. This is highlight and this is shadow. And I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to come in here, and what I'm going to do to brighten it up is not put more pin pressure in the shadow, but put more lines. And the act of putting more lines in will brighten it up just the same as putting full pin pressure. So since I've already added in the shadows, I don't really need to put more pin pressure because I've already put lines in place. So same, same concept. That's why it's easier, is I don't have to put so much pin pressure. I can sort of gently ease this in. But this is also why I like to give myself what I like to call like a little runway. I have enough room to sort of build in a gentle highlight, especially on a transition like this. And so, yeah, just adding more lines, not putting a ton of pressure, but you can already see it's brightening it up and making that transition a little different, where it's not so so jarring. There we go. And that looks much better. It's not quite that line, and that's what you want to create. You don't want a line in there. You want sort of this nice faded transition point, or nice tapered transition point. Back to full pin pressure because we haven't added in the shadows over here, right? So this is all full pin pressure. Again, avoiding those lines, making sure that they are standing out. But I need to make sure too that the line between highlight and shadow cuts at the same spot all the way down, despite breaking my line up. But that's not bad. We can probably thin these up. I'll do it without the sketch layer in place. The sketch is just sort of helping me make sure that I put in these lines, that I put in as much as I had originally intended, and that they make sense. And of course we have more down here. And just push it right in to that edge. Same thing down here. All the way up to those edges. All of this would be highlight. And then into the other section. And this should show up, you know, nicely. Yeah, so you can see that it's coming along. We'll just, we'll tighten up the lines as we get further into it. But otherwise it's coming out well. And so it can be really effective, right? You can really see how that, you know, stopping the line right at the edge. But it'd also be really easy to go too far and erase out on accident. Now, the way feathers and fur and stuff like that work is there's probably some sections that would be covered up here or there. So it's not the end of the world if you have like a slip, right? Like I push one of these down, like it'll look natural. It'll look like one of the feathers just sort of is crossing over into that section. Just like with the black sections down here, you know, when we really get to adding the highlights and stuff, they don't have to be perfect circles because the feathers are pushing down into them. Just like the edge doesn't have to have a perfect edge because they're probably coming off, right? So same thing here. The black is thicker though, but same thing. That full pin pressure up to the edge and in between. And then feathering that out. A little bit of, maybe it's too much. Do a little bit of highlighting under here, but be mindful that I don't want to come to the edge of the wing and make it too jarring. Oh yeah. Okay. I'm doing all right. And then, you know, all of this up by the nose, that's highlight definitively. I'm just sort of bringing it down. And we won't have a whole lot to interfere as we bring it down. You know, like we had these lines up here. There won't be any of that through this section of the face. So it'll be should go a lot quicker. And again, right down here with the little black circles on the feathers. No need to worry about how the feathers are blending in with them, right? So they're already not perfectly straight. I've already drawn them a little jagged, anticipating that feathers would be pushing them down. Wouldn't be a perfectly straight line. And inevitably, as you increase the length of your stroke, I find that I tend to accidentally press down harder anyway, so having these nice long feathers, it just makes it easier doing a nice long stroke since you'll put that natural pin pressure in. Just making sure, right, you're filling in all of it, not leaving an awkward gap somewhere, which when I take off the sketch layer will be easier to see, which I'm about to do, because we're almost there with the yellow. Right, so we pop that off, and that's where we are. So again, right through here, it's a little jagged, so I'm going to come in here and just sort of brighten up the areas around it. Even to this edge that I'd shadowed, brightening this up just a bit. Having a few stray feathers catching the light is not necessarily a bad thing. That can add to the naturalism, or the realism. And having feathers potentially going in a couple different ways, especially as you're coming up to an edge, can also help. Right, and I'm just going to push this in. Have that come up. Now, you can kind of see this looks a little out of place because of how much darker it is, but some of these edges would have highlight, so I'm going to give just a burst to this side, some of these. On kind of what are in effect the edges of the feathers themselves. That'll make them look more believable too. And then very gently and carefully filling in the gap that we left against the beak. This would be definitively in shadow. That's being blocked. And you have this spot underneath. All of these are in shadow. Maybe a little bit here, but not much. Starting to get to that other side. I'm going to have a little bit more down in here. Don't want that quite so dark. Yeah. And now I'm going to come in and narrow out just a little bit. Not a lot. Just want to make sure they're nice thin lines, and I'm not putting a ton of pin pressure as I do this. Just thinning them up, thinning up the black lines. Doesn't have to be anything major, just sort of and cleaning this edge. Right, just fixing any weird spots. And back here, right, that should have more substance to it. I don't have to do it everywhere. It looks like some of it did a good job of getting it nice and narrow. And it all doesn't have to be consistent, but especially because of how I drew it, I need to clean the lines up, make sure it looks good. Definitely a good start. So let's see. Let's do, this will be nice and quick, this sort of darker blue. So there's nothing really special here, it's just on this side it's going to be that full pin pressure. And on the other side it's going to be in shadow. But just like before, right, it's pushing into this little black spot. And over here, as I mentioned, in shadow, just holding back my pin pressure. Okay. Now we'll get the green. Same thing on the bottoms, just like we did with the yellow. Probably going to have a bit of shadowing, so let's go ahead and get that in. Just so that it's not a drawing transition to the edge of the composition. Although it might not be because of the way it's drawn. But it has the potential. I've certainly seen it happen where I wasn't expecting it. Okay, and then, yeah, just full pin pressure, just like the others. Also, like the others, you notice I'm stopping my strokes, creating a feathered effect, the illusion that there's feathers overlapping with each other. And then just making sure to blend in to the shadow I put at the bottom. So down here, feathering this in just like we did with the yellow. So we're going to get this little nose part, which is a lighter blue. And then we'll get the beak, and then the eye. Or I should say the white around the eye, and then we'll do the eye. I have this on. Okay. So light source coming from above and to the right, right? So, you know, in this one we're going to have to consider where shadows are kicking in. There's a dip here, so there will be some shadowing on this back side of the nose as it comes to the dip. I'm going to get that in place. But as it comes out of the dip, it's probably going to catch a little highlight before going back into shadow. I'm going to go ahead and just shadow the whole thing. Underneath will probably be in shadow on both sides. Right, because you have, it's bulging. And then of course where it's going into the nostrils will be in shadow. Underneath on this side it'll be catching light though. I'm going to do the whole thing on this side at least in shadow. There will be some highlight over here. And then over here, this is going to be some shadow. And where it's going in for the nostril, and on this side will be in shadow. Otherwise, this should be highlight. I was a little overzealous with my nostril stroke there. Okay. Now, feather all of this in. Right, as I'm feathering it in, I'm not putting a lot of pin pressure underneath as I sort of blend the highlight into the shadow. And of course over here as it goes into shadow. as well. Right, so then we have this dip, and then there's probably a little bit of highlight over here. Not much, so I'm not going to give it a big burst, but just a little, indicate that this is bulbous and coming back out. And cleaning up the edge where the nostril is, although not a little overzealous line. Right, and you get kind of that bulging happening. The deeper the shadow, the deeper the recess, and or the higher the peak. So if you ever want to temper it out, if I think this is too much, I can just add a little bit more brightness to it, which is what I'm going to do. Make it not quite so extreme. Already wasn't, but added a few lines, and you can still keep the bulge, you can still see the bulge, but now it's not quite as much. Alright, so the beak, you know, it's kind of this off color. Mostly straightforward because there's nothing really blocking it. I'm going to do the whole thing just like I did with the nose. I'm going to do the whole thing in shadow. Even areas that would be highlight. Just to sort it all out. And up under these feathers, you know, the feathers would be casting a shadow, so being mindful of that as well. Okay, so now, you know, it's going to be rounding away, so we have, obviously this would be highlight. So again, don't have to add a ton of pin pressure because I've already added lines in. Tip of the beak would be going into shadow because it's aimed down. With the bulge in the nose, there's probably a little shadowing right where all of that connects. And then of course the feathers are casting a shadow. So we're not pushing that too hard into the feathers, but sort of blending all this in. And then being mindful of where we're going to fade this out. Fading it out now a little bit. Putting just a little less lines, a little less pin pressure as we work our way over to a fully shadowed side. Again, don't want any jagged lines, so making sure that's nice and pristine. Alrighty. Now the white. Right, there's a little bit under here. Doing this in shadow because it's underneath the blue. Right, you have the bulge that was potentially casting a shadow on it. I'm just tying it together. Do a little bit of highlight in the middle. Maybe a little bit just like on that bulge. We have a little bit on that side. Nothing big, and then by the eye. Making sure that it's nice and straight. Now right under here would be in highlight because you have the light source coming from above and to the right, right? So you have this section that would be catching the light. Whereas on this one, right against the eye would be in shadow. So we'll do a little bit of light right behind it, but otherwise against the eye would be not so much. All right. Now, from what I could tell, their pupils seem to be white. I'm sorry. No. Their irises seem to be white, whatever that terminology is. The pupils are black, just like in everybody. So we're going to do it that way, but they have nice big pupils, so we're going to draw out very roughly because we're going to fix it. And then we'll lightly fill in this gap. Make sure that I put this on another layer, yeah. Right, so just sort of make the circle with the lines here. We're going to take the elliptical marquee tool and fix the pupil. Alright, and it's okay if it's looking a little bit to the left. Sometimes adding the light flare will recenter it. Okay, so elliptical marquee tool, gonna make a little oval here. And erase. Then I'm going to inverse it, go back to the brush tool to make sure that there's no gaps against the pupil itself. Now to add the highlights and shadows to it. So with the light source coming from above and to the right, means that against the pupil on this side we're going to have a burst of light where it's going to catch. And if we need to change the color because it's too much of the same, we can always do that too. There's going to be some highlighting. There's going to be some shadowing against the pupil on this side. But, you know, otherwise this would be in highlight until it gets to the edge. And then the edge of the eye itself too. All the way underneath. You have this highlight until it comes to the edge. And then over here, right, going back into shadow. And then above is also in shadow. All right. And then we can flush it out, you know, if you need to, like fade it just a little bit, but you want that to be a little bit more extreme because the top would be hiding it. We can always brighten this up too. Seems weird having a white iris. Makes me want to double check it, but I looked when I was doing research. It just seems strange. And then making sure that this isn't a jagged end to that burst of light against the pupil. Okay, now we're going to come up here. One of the most important things to do is to add the light flare. I'm going to take the elliptical marquee tool and push it down into where the highlight is, right? Like I don't want it up in here because this is shadowed. That wouldn't be where it is. It would be down. But still, light source coming from above and to the right, so you want that to reflect there. And fill it with the foreground color, which I've already, you know, obviously it's white. We can move it as needed. There we go. Probably even make it bigger. Let's do that. It's not a bad one, but let's make it a little bigger because this is such a big, I feel like it's such a big portrait, wouldn't hurt it. And then again, you know, we can move it around, pushing it into the pupil. Yeah. I'm going to add just one more thing to it, and that's just a little bit of highlight on the beak because of the nature of the beak. So we're just going to take the same white, and where the highlight would be hitting, right, just adding a little bit of white to it to create a highlighted effect and then fading it out. Because the way beaks are, they're more prone to being able to take these harsh highlights than like the feathers would be. So just making sure it fades after I do it. And that gives some burst to the beak. You know, you can see that there, what that does. Subtle, but because the beak's pushed forward and because of the nature of the beak, it gives us a chance to do that. And you know, it can sometimes add a lot when you can add just a little bit. And it doesn't take much to do. It wasn't full pin pressure, it was just some light white strokes and making sure that I concentrated them in the middle and then faded them out as I went out. So. Alright, so that is how you draw a budgie. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.